warm welcome to Anuradha Vedic Astrology. Today we are going to talk about careers with Penny Farrow. Penny, a big welcome.
Thank you so much, Anuradha. Always a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, Penny. Before we begin, careers are important for us, especially in today's day and time when everything is becoming seamless, boundaries and careers. But before we begin, a big thanks to all of you too for liking, sharing, and subscribing to our YouTube and Spotify channels and writing in your comments and suggestions there. If you haven't subscribed to us, please do, and do remember to press the bell icon so that you can get the updates ASAP. So Penny, I hand over the charge to you. Let's begin.
Okay, wonderful. So let me go ahead and start the presentation. Hopefully you can see it. So these days, I mean, it used to be fairly straightforward, right? Especially in more ancient times. You were born into a particular family. It's as if your career was already set. You know, you do what the family's always done. And even 100 years ago, it was much easier because the careers were, more defined. These days, people change careers like they change their clothes, right? So, and because of the proliferation and the minutia, for each career, for a Jyotishi to correctly to the detail predict career becomes a little harder. And often we're in the business of, well, you may gravitate towards this, or this, or, maybe medicine, but then trying to find the specialty becomes difficult. So for starters, there is a kind of interesting way of figuring out what I like to call what floats one's boat. So what someone have a predilection towards? And it might not be that that's the career. It might not be, but it might be a very cherished hobby, or it might be something that they had considered a career and then for more practical reasons went to something else. And I always find that, my clients have been sort of surprised when I've said, looks like you might have been even thinking about a music career. And then that may have changed a little bit. I still play. I love that. I would have done that, except, for family and support, it's not really something that is that stable, at least in the West, where you're touring or you're, the symphonies at night when you're not with your kids, all that kind of thing. But still, they're very happy to be seen that way, that they have these interests. And then, of course, they're thrilled to know that it's actually seeable in a chart. You can see that. You could see that I was interested in music at that time. So one of the methods that I've used, I learned from my Guruji, is this idea of grahas and kendras. So now why kendras? Well, can they be career indicators? So let's consider that. What happens when a graha is in a kendra? So should a graha be in a kendra, it will influence either the house of karmas, what we do. And in South India Shastra, the first bhava is considered almost as much as the 10th with respect to major interests like career, because the first bhava is the prakriti, the native's first response, their first reaction. So any graha that's in a kendra is going to be affecting either the house of karma or the first house, the prakriti. And of course, certain grahas can do more than one of those, like Mars or Saturn, if they're in kendras. So they become very important, should they be there, in creating some kind of predilection. So we're going to look into this and see how it works. Kind of fun. So as I mentioned, any graha there is going to influence prakriti or the house of karmas. Any graha here or there, same thing, the prakriti or the house of karma. Now, sometimes a graha doesn't have to be in kendra to affect the 10th or the 1st. Yeah. Now, the important thing is I'm not talking about the 4th or the 7th. That's not really what we're activating. Needs to be activating the 1st or the 10th.
Yes.
So by special aspect, Jupiter, as we could see, is going to aspect the 10th here and here. And it'll aspect the 1st here and here. Mars aspects the 10th or aspects the 1st. And Saturn, right? 10th or 1st. Now, it is a little more impactful when the graha actually is in the Kendra, but we would definitely still use these special aspects as well for providing a little extra support for a particular career or interest. So with this in mind, let's consider how the particular nature of the grahas might tilt someone in one direction or another. Depending on what grahas are in Kendras, they can kind of push us towards certain tendencies or certain pursuits. So should it be benefics in Kendras, just because of their Samya nature, more compassionate, more caring, more tendency towards things that are alive and things that are growing. So you get our people who are gardeners, who grow our food preparation people. You get those that want to support others, humanistic pursuits. So you get our teachers, our psychologists, our caregivers. Here, I'm not so much pointing to the doctors, more to the nurses, who are more on the caregiving side. And then all kinds of people that are in the arts. And just in general, this idea of tending to
People
that
around.
which is humanistic. Yeah. So they will tend to promote activities in life, again, whether it's hobbies, or whether it actually is the career that has this kind of bent, this kind of tendency. Whereas when we look at malefics, and now we're not looking at malefics, are they bad? No, we're looking at malefics in a very different way in terms of how they cultivate our predisposition towards some of the things that we focus on in our life. So they give us more dhatu, or the technical skills, inanimate skills. So they may be interested in building, they may be interested in computers, machinery, all kinds of things like that. And so depending, on the composition of the chart, you could indicate to someone or question someone who is being advised, sometimes very strongly advised by, let's say, a parent. You should be an engineer. I want you to be an engineer. And you're looking at the chart and there's Venus and Jupiter and all over. And you might say, is that what you're really interested in? No, I'm interested in teaching and philosophy. See what I mean? So, you can maybe support that person's point of view, but, my karmas, my destiny pattern said, I might not be very happy as an engineer. So it can be useful in some kind of career counseling, or, and this is very important, sometimes I come across people like that, they have gone into IT or engineering or this or that, or, pleasing, whatever. And they're not happy puppies. And so I'll often say to them, for practical reasons, this is what you're doing and this is good, but you should develop your interest in these other things on the side. You should do that, maybe on weekends or this or that, and because it's important that supports you so that you can go ahead with this more practical career without feeling, put upon or unhappy, or because in your chart it does say, and it doesn't have to be your career, but could it be a major interest, something that you love? And so you should cultivate it, and use that as, I'm doing this, might not be what my choice was, but it was, my parents wanted me to, or I needed to do it for my family. But I'm also going to make it clear that I need some of this time to do these other things because they nourish me. And there it is in my chart. So that can be very helpful.
Yes.
So let's look at a couple of kundalis
Charts.
and sort of a little idea of how this might work. It's a very simple idea, right? Now, it quickly gets complicated. And the complication comes from, what if they're both, right? What if they're both benefics and malefics? So there isn't the time to do this here. But my Guruji came up with incredibly brilliant permutations of grahas. You know, if this little collection of grahas are activating the Kendras, then it'll go more like this. If this little collection, it'll go more like this. And quite a few of those. And I've always used that as a guideline in working with, as I said, both careers and just these tendencies. Because, you know, sometimes people will, if something's activating their first bhava, let's say, right, the activation is there. That might be more their nature. You know, this is what they really like. That's their nature. When it activates the 10th bhava, that's what they have to be doing, because that's the house of karmas. Sometimes those clash. So you could have someone who has a strong tendency naturally towards something. This is not what they wind up doing. And also, you know, part of our job as Jyotishis is to help people be okay with what is. And one of those ways of doing that is showing them why they feel that way about their career, why they feel about that way about the other thing they're doing, and vice versa. I mean, it can work the other way around. So it's just this idea of this kind of pointing to their proclivities based on the kinds of grahas that wind up being in Kendras. Okay, so this is the chart of Christopher Reed, unfortunately no longer with us. And if we look at his chart, smack right in our face is he has these two super strong benefics. Jupiter is strong by retrogression and also spotless. There's no affliction on that Jupiter whatsoever. Venus has some flanking of natural malefics, but it's both Swarashi and Digbala. So very strong, and they're supporting each other, right? That mutual drishti is amazing. And for listeners that are aware of yogas, there's like a zillion yogas being made just by those two grahas and a million more by Moon and Mars. So the other thing that plays with this, especially because we have these transitions of careers, usually, you know, in the older times when you had a career, that was it. That was your life. That's not happening. It's the fluidity that you were talking about, the absence of boundaries now, right? Yes. The idea of I can do anything, anything's possible. So one of the things that also becomes important is dasha sequence, especially if we're getting mixing. Here, there's no mixing, but it's also very clear that his dasha sequence would completely support the idea of grahas and kendras, because he's born in a Mercury dasha, right? And so he has Mercury for some time, and then into Ketu, and then prime of life into Venus. Somewhere 20 years old, for 20 years, he's in this Venus dasha. And this, of course, was his huge career. And then very unfortunately, he moves into his sun dasha. And this is a very ominous dasha because there's a double maraka together, Sun and Saturn, collected there. And it's a big contrast. You know, Venus is making all these yogas, it's beautiful, and the Sun is doing very little, you know, Buddha Ditta yoga, it's about it. So it's, and then there's all kinds of reasons, other reasons that he met with that unfortunate accident. But this is clearly, anybody looking at this chart that plays with this particular methodology, this is a humanist. Whether it was actually the arts or whether maybe he might have been someone who was very good at counseling, psychology, because fourth bhava is...
But he did a lot of charity work also, which is Jupiter and Venus also support. After his accident, he was one of the pioneers in a paralysis kind of charity work. So yes, this
He
chart
did,
is important.
exactly. So that showed up as well. And that's the whole point, that we don't have to be, it's that only, it may be, again, there's these other side benefits that come. And he did a lot of cheerleading and counseling for other people that were in his same situation. He inspired them, all of those things. So it is very important to not only fix on one thing, but of course, his main thing was he's an actor, and Superman, in fact. And yeah, and sometimes a person might have something like this, but they may not have the preeminence combinations. So very often, if they're big preeminence combinations, there are very few people that become very famous by being counselors, or yeah, Freud,
Yes.
Jung,
Yes.
I count them on one hand, right? But actors, people in the arts, musicians, so if there's preeminence, usually this kind of combination will probably result with someone who's in the arts, or at least have an interest. But if there isn't, and if there isn't a strong lagna, and we could look at this and say, this isn't a strong lagna, it's afflicted. And the moon is not a strong moon, and it's debilitated, and it's afflicted by Mars and Saturn. That's true, unless you got me confused about this, and if you didn't hear the last class I did on Parvata Yoga. But Christopher Reeves has Parvata Yoga. He has a dispositor of his Agnesha, his Swa, and a Trikona.
Yes.
I would maintain that without this Parvata Yoga, no Christopher Reeves. He wouldn't have the utilization ability to take advantage of the beautiful combination he had in his Venus dasha. So I'm kind of melding my last podcast, just a little plug for that. Okay, now let's look at someone else. A horse of a different color, isn't it?
Yes.
So here we see a tremendous activation on the part of the malefics, Dhatu. Now, again, we're not looking at them as, oh, bad marriage, or anything along those lines. No, we're looking at it we have a different hat on. And this is the other thing, it's so important when people are doing Jyotish. The grahas themselves have a lot of hats in their closet. And for a particular question that you're asking, they're wearing a particular hat. And you have to make sure that you recognize the hat that they're putting on. And in this case, when we're talking about grahas and kendras, because even if we resolve the parivartana back to making Saturn and Mars both swap, they're still malefics. They are still malefics. Malefics are catabolic. They're not anabolic. However, in this context of grahas and kendras, pretty much all the malefics, except for the sun, are in kendras. And so this is a beautiful science combination. He has a lovely science combination here, and technical combination. And the way this parivartana runs, it also gives him a big research component, because this is a beautiful Kesari Yoga in the bhava of research, with this exalted fullish moon. This is an almost full moon, right? It's waxing towards that full. And this is Louis Pasteur. So very famous for science, very famous for research,
Logical
all of
thinking.
those things.
Logical thinking.
Yep. Sharp thinking. Really very beautiful. Okay, let's take a look at another one. So here we have a little mixture, but I wanted to also show you how some of these combinations work. So we have a mixture because we have both Jupiter and Mars. If we read the Parivartana back, we can throw in Venus if we like, but usually we stay more like this. This is also a very yogic chart. If you look at this chart, you could see that Lagnesha in Sambandha with Saturn is making Raj yogas. And also that Jupiter and Venus exchange, that Mahaparivartana, is making money yogas. So this is a strong chart. Now, this particular combination is a very reliable, I would say. Reliable doesn't mean 100%. But very often when someone has both Jupiter and Mars in a Kendra, they are interested in law or something around the legal profession. And it also is part of a politics combination as well. The Sun in Kendras, Sun, Mars, Jupiter in Kendras, if all three of them are in Kendras, almost inevitably the person is something in politics. Absenting the Sun, you see the Sun and Mars are the Kshatriyas. So politicians normally have that Kshatriya energy. Jupiter gives advisor idea to it. So Jupiter, Mars very often will give you
political advice.
Someone legal, whether it's actually a lawyer themselves or a paralegal, again, depending on the status of the chart. To be a lawyer, you have to have education, so you have to see education in the chart. But it could be even court reporters, people around that profession. Jupiter represents courts and judges and that sort of idea. So this is partly where Jupiter comes from. Mars, of course, is litigation and contesting, right? In a lawsuit, someone is the enemy, right? There's that antagonistic thing. It's going on in our country big time right now. Lawsuits are like, everybody's looking for what's new in the lawsuits these days. And also, that's Mars's nature. Mars likes to argue, even for fun, debating. So, in fact, Jupiter and Mars are the grahas for debate, both of them. Jupiter has that Hamsa voice.
Yes, and it's also Digbali in the Lagna. Yes.
Yeah, and so they're both in the Lagna. Jupiter's stronger than Mars, here it has Digbala, but still it's a beautiful combination. And this is the chart of Tony Blair. So Tony Blair was a barrister, his wife also. And of course, she's part of the power behind the throne. She continued to do that, made good money, bought them real estate. They're in very good circumstances, but of course encouraged him to go for politics. And obviously that is what he did. And in fact, it was Jupiter that he was elected in, I think, very end of Jupiter and then into Saturn. And Saturn, of course, makes the big 110 Maharaj Yoga with Venus.
Saturn is also the yoga karak for this lagna. Saturn is also the yoga karak for this lagna and is sitting in the
Yep, it's beautiful. And both of them are strong. Saturn is Ragotama, qualified Ragotama, retrograde, beautiful. So if I were to get this chart, of someone who's thinking about what to major in or, what might I be interested in, I would be moving in that direction. You might think of the legal profession, either exactly law, depending on the strength of the education combinations, right? All of that. And I might also put in, this is also a chart because of the strength of the 10th bhava, 9th and 10th bhava, and the yogas they're making. It could go in a political direction, but a lot of politicians are lawyers, or they've had some training in law, right?
Right.
Or they make law. So if they're making law, that's the same sort of idea, right? Anything having to do with that profession. Okay, so now I want to show you how complicated this can be. And also how fascinating in terms of everything is kind of there. So I'm going to show you the chart of a very diverse person who has everything in Kendras except for his Lagna Lord. It's kind of an isolated Lagna Lord. Everything is in Kendras. Wow. And this is the chart of Howard Hughes. So Howard Hughes is a kind of Renaissance man in all the things that he was interested in. And as quite a young child, because we can see that he's also born in a Mercury dasha. There's quite a young child, he's already inventing things. You're very interested in what makes this work and taking things apart and putting things together and all of that. So he's also for various reasons, very sheltered by a very unbalanced mother. And he does wind up losing both his mother and his father quite early in life, and winds up inheriting a huge amount of money. And now he's in his Venus dasha. What does he do in his Venus dasha with all of that money? He goes to Hollywood. So I don't know how many people know this about Howard Hughes, but he was a producer. And he actually won an Academy Award. And he had several movies, some of them quite violent. And we could see that in a Venus dasha, what kicks in? What kicks in is just like Christopher Reeve's. Strong Jupiter by retrogression, strong Venus by, no, not as strong, Digbala, by Digbala. And so we have a very strong combination for the arts. And we can even use the moon in the arts. Now the moon isn't very strong here. It's mixed condition. It's
the moon is Digbali. Yes.
Yeah, Digbala and Nietzsche, but also new moon. So it's not the strongest, but it would still give confluence. You know what else he did in his Venus dasha? He was building hotels. He got into the hotel industry. So this is also what? This is humanistic. It's feeding people, it's housing people. So the whole hotel industry, also in the Venus dasha, and also the moon kicks in whenever it comes to food. You know, you're going to see nurturing and that kind of thing involved. So, but he also got into the aviation industry. He was flying, he almost was killed in an airplane crash. So he was an engineer, even if he didn't have engineering degrees. And so he has a beautiful combination for this. He has Saturn, Mars, and Mercury. That combination is excellent for engineers. So in these various parts of his life, he did all these different things. He incorporated all these different things. The movies, the engineering, even he had military stuff. Not that he was in the military, but he worked for, there was something about raising a submarine, and he had contracts with the government. And so military, Saturn, Mars. They're the grahas that we look at for military. So I don't mean to present this as this is all you do. I'm presenting this as a very fun way of seeing how the wind might be blowing for someone, either because of dasha sequence or very clearly marked, like Pasteur, very clearly marked. He was going to stay technical. He wasn't going to go out there and grow lilies or something. He's not going to do that. Or become a ballet dancer. That was not happening. And on the other hand, Christopher Reeves was not going to be an engineer, or a scientist, or build airplanes or cars or anything along those lines. So in some cases, it's fairly straightforward. In other cases, you have to pick your way through. But if you ever sat with someone, like Howard Hughes at a later time in his life and said to him, there's so much diversification. You were just into everything. I bet you had a strong scientific bent. You might even have been interested in medicine in a way. I don't think you became a doctor. And then Howard Hughes would say, when my father died and I was left with all that money, I funded research institutes for research on heart health. See what I mean? You would have been right. I said, yeah, wow. And along with that, you have this technical skills. You could probably build anything. Yeah, I build airplanes. I build that. And yet, funnily enough, I see this real interest in the arts. And maybe that was around this time. Yeah, well, you know what? Academy Awards for the movies that I presented, and that's been an interest all my life. You see what I mean? And then something with transportation, the fourth bhava, maybe hospitality industry. Oh yeah, I did hotels, and you see, and then somebody would look at you and say, "How do you know that?" And so it's been fun sitting with people and coming up with those kinds of ideas, and it's playful. I don't say you are a blah 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 blah, but boy, I see diversity in your chart. I see you might have gone in this direction, that direction. Maybe during this time of life, you may decide you want to change. And if it isn't supported for financial reasons or family, then you may want to take something on that's a hobby so that you stay happy. So I hope all the listeners will enjoy this as something that's playful, but also, I'm telling you, can be very accurate, and people can be very surprised by what you said. Now, there's some little flaws in it in terms of I'm working with an equal house, so something might not actually be in a Kendra, right? If you're looking at Shripati or some of the other methods. So this, you can't be too fixed on that this is always going to work. But I have found it charming, and my clients have found it surprising, and I thought it would be a fun thing to present to you guys today.
Yes, it indeed was. And if you look into it, it's something that one needs to explore in detail. And because they are also the Kendras, the Vishnu sthanas, where one makes an effort. So it's so right to use these points, to use these Kendras as one to come up with our profession or our karmic points. Yes, it definitely is. So do put it to use in your charts. See how it works for you and others around you. Until we meet with you again, stay safe. Thank you so much, Vedi.
Oh, my pleasure. Be well.
Thank you.
Please hit the bell icon for fresh updates. Don't forget to like, share, and comment on the videos, and please subscribe to our channel.